All right, we were trying to pick up where we left off last time. There was a scenario, I think where we finished last time was a scenario around the kubelet pulling an image anonymously, um, and then another pod trying to use it without providing credentials.
Mhm.
And this is like a super specific, maybe an edge case scenario, but I think it exercises a lot of interesting aspects about how we bookkeep. And so, um, Peter, you probably have more context than either of us on sort of the existing work and research around how stuff was keyed by, uh, is it keyed by the image spec in the pod, or is it keyed by the digest that it's actually that image spec resolves to?
It has to be the image spec because we don't have the digest at that point because we haven't yet tried to pull. So the digest comes from the runtime. Kubelet doesn't can't populate it.
Okay.
So it has to be the image spec.
Okay. So it's keyed by the image spec. An image that does not yet exist on the node is like an image spec mapped to an unknown digest. So we there, it's not on the node. We have to pull. Once we pull that image and it is on the node, there is a way for the kubelet to say this image spec corresponds to this digest. Right?
At that point of time, yes.
Okay. And that is, it does that lookup when deciding whether to pull or not, right? Because the image pull policy and the presence or absence of an image tagged with that spec determines whether the kubelet tries to pull today, right?
Right. I'm gonna look at the original PR to see. Yeah, so it actually uses the image ref, which is the I always forget. It's like a very specific thing. It might actually be the so it is actually the resolve digest for that image. It's like the registry digest pair, basically.
Config we talking about config digest or
We're
talking about
we're arbitrary back off. We're talking about how the kubelet tracks the images that require authentication. And Peter was saying it tracks it by digest. And I guess this is only relevant for images which exist on the node, which mean we can take the image spec and resolve it to a digest.
Yes. Something to note in the case that we were talking about below, the first pulled with auth, then not pulled with auth. I presume most of those cases will be from different registries, which will key differently because the fully qualified, the digest will have the registry domain and then the digest SHA.
Forgive my ignorance. I thought digest was shared across registries. So if two registries have
Yes,
the
it
same
it
bit?
can be. Um,
Like when
but
you pull it, won't it dedupe that and say like, oh, I already have this layer and I already have these bits, therefore just add
the
the
runtime does that, but the kubelet isn't aware. The kubelet's only thinking about image spec, so it's only thinking about like, registry and tag pairs basically. And then it asks the runtime, what does this registry tag pair map to? And then the runtime does all of the sort of OCI resolution stuff.
So the kubelet will ask the registry or the runtime. Who
The runtime. The kubelet never talks to the registry, only talks to the runtime.
Okay. The kubelet says, I'm going to need this image. Tell me if you have this image. And if it's already on the node, the runtime will come back and say, yep, I've got that image and it is this digest.
Right.
Okay. And then the kubelet takes.
So imagine this pod A, pod B scenario where pod A has the creds and pod B can pull with no auth, and we wanted to deduplicate that pull. Usually what would happen for that to happen, like pod A would have had to try from the registry its image is like configured to with no auth, would have failed, would have gone to pulling with creds, which means pod B would need to be pulling from a different registry somehow, or like a different tag, or like the image, the fully qualified digest would end up being different. The SHA of that image could end up being the same, but the like registry location would be different. And I'm pretty sure the image ref might contain both. Mike, do you remember?
I'm not sure. I thought we were just doing the config digest, but which is as the image ref.
Okay.
The current
It
implementation
may be different between the runtime, but I know Peter, for a while you guys were doing it a little bit differently, and then
yeah, we just went through all this like a release or two ago, and I've since forgotten exactly what we chose to do. Okay, so
in my head, we're Containerd is using the image ref as the common ID for the image for status, and on the pull, that's what we respond with.
And image ref in your case, is that a SHA or is that the full registry plus SHA combination?
It's the SHA for the config digest.
Okay. So I might be wrong then. My concern there could be incorrect.
Okay. I think.
Well, I mean, it's both a concern and an opportunity. You know what I mean, Peter? If we really wanted it to be separate per registry.
No, yes, we do want it to be separate. I'm pretty sure by the sound way what you said, it is currently. So the image ref in this case, based on what you said and what I'm looking at the cryo-code, it actually does look like it's a we're using just the hashed config, the registry configuration piece. So which means it could be agnostic to registry.
Yeah, I don't think it is, but it's possible if you're creating a new manifest config for the image, right? Then I don't know if you remember in an image manifest, there's also a reference to the config for that image, and then that has its own shot, and that's the one where, and it should be the same per image if you're pushing it to two registries. But I'm not, again, yeah, maybe. It depends what's in the config. If there is a destination target in the config, when they push the tag, they're creating the config on the fly, Peter, then yeah, that builder would be creating one unique per. But I don't think so.
So I guess maybe the answer is we may not be able to do this just based on like the SHAs may be different, but we could potentially design it in such a way where it could deduplicate the pull if the image refs happen to be the same. But I don't know if we can guarantee that the image refs will be the same, even if the content, like even if it is technically the exact same image pushed to just 2 registries.
But just as easy, we could, instead of just returning back the image ID, right? We could also pass back the name of the registry from which it was actually pulled, right? The destination, as opposed to the one you asked for, because it may not be the same. But we can tell you which one it was actually pulled from. We could probably give you a list if it was forwarded, right?
Yeah,
Just so you know, Jordan, sometimes when you pull an image, it could get forwarded to another location.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure we care. Like, if I asked for X and I have credentials for X, and that ended up translating into somewhere else and something else, but I ultimately succeeded, I don't think I care.
Yeah, you would only care if you're worried about the, what if the routing changes in the future, or what if we have an attribute or an artifact, if you will, that specifies, the duration of life for that kind of thing, and it's by registry or account, right?
Yeah.
I would consider that to be the purview of the runtime. Basically, it's the runtime who's technically lying to the kubelet, saying like, yeah, I'm pulling your image totally, and then it's just pulling it from a different place. So that's like, if we need to have any special considerations, it should be added to the runtime.
Yeah, either way, we're not going to pull the layers if we already had, right? It doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, but the thing we're trying to optimize for in this like pod A, pod B scenario is not even reattempting the pull. If my understanding of Jordan's
all right, let's
basis.
step through like what the kubelet does and the information it has at each step to think about what it needs to do in terms of bookkeeping, so that if the kubelet like exits at any point, it's safe when it starts back up, right? So like pod comes in, says I want to run this image. Kubelet checks if the image already exists, right? And if it does, great. We know the image spec and we know the digest, and we can like go look up information about how that digest was pulled. If the image doesn't exist, then the kubelet's going to ask the runtime to pull it. But if the kubelet crashes, like issues the pull request to the runtime and then crashes, we want to keep track of, we asked to pull this image spec with credentials. We don't know the digest yet, but we asked to pull it with credentials, so that if the kubelet starts back up, it's like, oh, this image exists. We know we tried to pull it with credentials, and it doesn't sort of fall into the, I guess it's a pre-existing image, whatever, bucket. So before the pull, we don't know the digest. I think before the kubelet issues the pull to the container runtime, it has to persist the intent to pull with credentials, maybe with or without. I'm not sure.
If we pulled without credentials and the image successfully pulled, then basically we would treat every container as being able to access that image. So the ultimate result would be the same as that image pre-existing.
And depending on what they chose to do with pre-existing images, if they said never verify pre-existing, then it does the right thing. If they said only exempt specific ones, then this one that got pulled and the kubelet crashed might prompt a re-verify, but that's probably fine.
Yeah, either way, like if it does, like, yeah, pulling a re-verify in that case, I mean, I guess it wouldn't be that much extra work to, right. But
So
it
like,
also wouldn't be that much extra work to persist the no auth pull versus the auth pull. You know, like if we're already persisting that information in preparation for the kubelet to crash, we could persist both
like
and save that potential.
I kind of like if we're having the kubelet say, I'm about to pull a thing, I'm doing it with or without credentials. I kind of like just having it persist the intent, issue the pull, and then when the pull, if the pull fails, it can just drop the record. If the pull succeeds, then it shifts the record of I pulled anonymously into, oh, this doesn't require auth. And if it had credentials, then it shifts the record of I pulled with credentials into this does require auth. I think there's more symmetry if it always persists the intent to pull.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
that into an anonymous or a credentialed.
Also in the case where you're able to pull it anonymously or with no credentials, you probably wouldn't want to issue another pool if somebody else is trying to do it, right? You wouldn't want to contact the registry, and so I think this is once again where we could just get his request and like don't forward it to the registry in that case if it's like technically no health pool.
And we could even, I guess the information we're going to record for any given digest is either the fact that it's allowed to, it's anonymous, it's anonymously usable, or it doesn't require pod credentials. Or if it did require pod credentials, what the dimensions and hashes of the credentials that have been verified against it are, right? So the info that we would be persisting is the image spec, which we know. We don't know the digest yet. And then one of pulling anonymously, or the set of credential dimensions hashes used to pull. Right? And so an anonymous pull would say, I am about to pull this image spec anonymously. We'll see what happens when it succeeds or fails. Or I'm about to pull this image spec using credential from this location with this content hash. And then if kubelet crashes and restarts, I think there's a sort of a resume cleanup step to go over the items persisted here and check if those images exist on the node, right? Over persisted intent to pull entries, delete ones that don't correlate to images on the node, maybe. Could the pull still be in progress in the background?
Yes.
Okay.
But we wouldn't be able to get the response to that. But we would know at the time, because we would ask the runtime, okay, what images do you have? We do that at startup, the kubelet.
And so
and the runtime
in
should
progress, would that be
it
visible?
should not show the in progress. It should show only the ones that have been pulled, I think.
Okay.
So we would actually not, we would not see the image as existing, and then in the background, the image would suddenly start existing. But the kubelet, so the kubelet might see, like, as it kind of continuously calls list images, it'll see this image pop up, basically.
Okay. So if we want to delete entries that we think don't exist on the node, we have to make sure we don't race with a pull that's still in progress in the runtime. I don't know what kind of cancellation exists. If the kubelet asks the runtime to pull and then crashes, does that propagate to like the gRPC request closing or canceling the pull at all, or does the pull just keep running in the background?
I think that would end up being runtime dependent. I don't think we declare anything on the CRI spec whether a pull should be cancelable or not. I'm pretty sure it's not technically cancelable, though the runtime could see that the context was canceled and like give up, but
Okay. All right, so iterate over persisted entries, ones that there is now an image on the node. I think it's reasonable to say like we kicked off a pull anonymously or credentialed, we crashed, we came back, and the image is there. I think it's reasonable to say the node pull request was the reason this thing now exists, and say we pulled it anonymously, it's here now, so treat it anonymous. We pulled it credentialed, it's here now, treat it credentialed. Like technically it's possible that something out of band happened, but I guess that's always true. Like it's always possible that something out of band happened.
right.
The delete cleaning up intent to pull. I think we want to avoid a cleanup race. It would be good to know if there's a way to see if any pulls are in progress, or maybe timeout. Like I don't know. We need to think about how to avoid a race there. So that's our crash and restart scenario. If the
on the still in progress thing, we currently don't add it in unless until we get a response. We don't start. So there's no lock to the records or anything like that while the attempt is in place.
In the runtime?
No, in kubelet. In the new code in kubelet, on the response from the pull is when we actually do it.
Today, yes.
On a log. Right.
Yeah, but we need to do, I think we need to add a before pull step to do bookkeeping, so that if an image shows up, like in the crash and restart case, we are safe.
On the next ensure for the same pod.
Or so that an image that we pulled with credentials doesn't accidentally fall into the pre-existing images bucket.
Yeah.
So if the pull fails, we just delete the intent to pull.
Storing the kubelet cache of these. Yeah.
Yeah. If the pull succeeds, we relocate the
makes sense
to pull entry
right.
underneath the digest.
That's your. We want to presume that it was, but we don't know we did it with the secret. Or
yeah, yeah.
That's sort of. I see the problem you're saying. We need that's the pre-step.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking through the code, Peter and Jordan. We do have an opportunity to add additional info records when we do when we do this a pull image into the status of that image itself for the record, so that
is that a follow-up step to the pull, or is, and when you say an opportunity, are you saying like from the kubelet? The kubelet could say pull this image and annotate it this way, or
well, yes, but I mean without even kubelet asking for it, we could today add to the status of this image, right? A little additional details.
Sure. I'm hesitant to do anything that depends on a new CRI API thing or behavior in the runtimes.
Yeah, it would be adding an additional field to the info struct that we provide in the status of the image, where we could state that in this particular case, right, we know the image was pulled through CRI, right, and right, had or did not have creds when it was pulled. We don't have to store the creds, but it would be really easy to mark, mark the image that we're providing status for as having this additional information. Because
yeah, I'm happy to see more information come back to help us make better decisions. I want to work really hard to not require changes at the runtime level for this feature to work. All right. One question around here. I think Kubelet can pull things in parallel now. Does it? I wonder if it single flights on the thing it's pulling.
It was when I was writing the patch on that particular pod. It's ensuring in a sequence.
Okay. All right. Cool. So if the kubelet is only has a single pull in flight for a given image spec, then having it be persist the intent to pull, do the pull. When the pull completes, if it fails, just delete the intent to pull. If it succeeds, then promote the intent to pull info into the digest, fold it into the digest record for the image, which we now have the digest for.
Yeah, kubelet would have to be doing the same pod twice, at the same time, to get into that kind of situation.
Yeah, I think that it's possible the kubelet actually is not doing very much deduplication here. The reason being, a while back, like 4 years ago or something, we had to add code in cryo to deduplicate image pulls, which implies to me that the kubelet wasn't doing this. That's possible. It's possible that that was a layer-based thing. So like a lot of pods are trying to pull the same base layer, and that was where the in-flight problem came from. But I just want to point, it's possible the kubelet isn't doing this deduplication.
Yeah, I remember, Peter. We ran into that too. Yeah, a lot of dedupes, so we had to.
We need to. If we put something that's going to start persisting intent to pull based only on image spec, then we either need to single flight on the image spec, or we need to handle the case where pod A tries to pull image spec anonymously and pod B tries to pull image spec with credentials. And like, we have to think about that case.
Yeah.
Anyway, test case, simultaneous attempts to pull from two pods with different credentials.
Possibly different registries.
Well, in this case, we're keying the intent to pull off the image spec. So the different registries will actually show up as different entries before we've pulled. So that's fine. But where they're actually running the same image string, the kubelet either needs to handle multiple entries or like disentangle these two pull attempts so that when one succeeds, it correctly promotes the anonymous or credential info from that pull attempt.
Yeah, not to make it too much more complicated, but just to let you know, I'm sure you already heard, right? With Docker, there's two reasons anonymous could fail. One, right, it's a private image and you need creds. The other is you've already pulled your 100 images.
Yeah, I don't actually care about failures. I only care about successes.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Pod A pulls anonymously and fails, but has credentials, uses credentials and succeeds. So now we think this image requires credentials.
It didn't require credentials. It required it depends on the 100 thing.
Okay. So, but that actually works. All that means is if another pod comes in anonymously, we'll say, we don't know you can use this anonymously. Last time it required credentials, so we're going to poke the registry. And if this time we poke the registry,
if it's been an hour, now you can't pull it anonymously.
Then it works great.
And it works, right?
And we update the image, and we're like, actually, this one is fine to be anonymous. So that works. I think that's the correct.
It does. I just thought I'd throw it out there as a.
Okay.
It's something to think about. It really didn't need creds. It just needed
the digest entry.
patience.
And so when we promote the intent to pull info, well, hang on. So this is before pull. Then after pull, move this up here. If the pull fails, we remove the intent to pull entry. If the pull succeeds, we promote the intent to pull into the digest entry. So if the pull was anonymous, mark that digest as allowed for anonymous. If the pull was credentialed, add the credential location or hash, or however we represent that, add that to the set of verified credentials for the digest. So I think the information we need to keep track of for a given digest is the Boolean, whether or not this was pulled anonymously successfully.
No.
Did you have a question?
No, I really like that.
Okay.
And I want Peter to duh.
Okay.
We can just, when we do the status, we can just say we pulled this one anonymously, or it was loaded anonymously. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's an anonymous image. We can say status image exists and it's anonymous.
Okay.
And then we don't need a serious record. We can just give you the status.
Okay. Just I know we're talking about multiple levels, and I think your focus is on the runtime, which is great. And I know nothing about the runtime, and so I think what we're talking about here is bookkeeping the kubelet will do. If the runtime can give the kubelet more information in the future, the kubelet will certainly be happy to make use of that. But for now, we have to assume it doesn't have that information, right?
Well, we could design it in such a way that we would need that additional information.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I think it's important for us as runtimes to know whether or not an image was credentialed or not.
I guess. I think the reason ultimately we would do this is if it was simpler in aggregate if we reported it from the runtime rather than have the kubelet do the bookkeeping. We can definitely do it, the kubelet do the bookkeeping, but I think that it's worthy of considering adding changes to the CRI to make the overall code like overhead lower.
Yeah, I think
it solves two problems with one stuff. Now I can load it with CryCTL or some other load tool with creds, right? Outside of Kubernetes. And then when Kubernetes says, what's the status? I can say, oh, here it is, but we used creds.
Okay, so the Boolean that says like with or without creds, that's a Boolean. Like that's useful and simple.
Useful and simple. And
if it requires creds, which credentials those are and where they're located and like the hash of the particular credentials, I think there's like pod specific credentials and node wide credentials and like different things the kubelet has visibility to. I'm not sure we'd be able to get to that level of coordination between the runtime and the kubelet. But just the Boolean,
not immediately, like, without some kind of
anonymous or not, or credentialed or not,
right?
That could be useful.
That's what I'm thinking. And later on, we could come up with a KEP for doing auth in conjunction with kubelet, right? With Kubernetes, And then, but that's another cap.
Yeah. Okay. So after pull, I guess this still goes up in the before pull. So like before pull, we persist this. If we crash and restart, and we never the kubelet never actually got to the pull finished code. If we crash and restart, we have to do some like disposition of stuff, garbage hanging around in this intent to pull bucket at startup. After pull, if it fails, we drop it. If it succeeds, we promote it. If any successful anonymous pull like marks the digest as allowed for anonymous, any successful credentialed pull adds the credentials to the set of verified credentials for the digest. So I don't think we have a garbage collection problem. This intent to pull thing should only have as many entries as we allow parallel pulls.
That was a question for with the previous design where we only knew the image spec, but with this design, I think it should be fine. I was looking into the garbage collection code, and I noticed that it is caching images by IDs that it gets from the runtime, and so I was wondering how we would do the mapping. But I think that with this code, we should be on the safe side.
Failure to write an image. Let me see if this is addressed now. Failure to write. I think this failure to write that would look like so when we do this promotion, we would write the digest entry, then delete the intent to pull entry. So if we crash here and start back up, then we fall into this bucket and we say, oh, we see our intent to pull entry. And that image exists, so we do the promotion to a digest entry. So I don't think we have a race anymore, as long as we write the digest entry first and then delete the intent to pull entry. Okay, so I think we can drop that. I don't think we have a GC issue anymore. Pull, promote. Reorder the sentence so it reads naturally. Promote to digest entries. See below. Yeah. And then what are the other parts of the life cycle? On image GC, delete the digest entries for the so when we garbage collect a given image, delete all the credential info, anonymous info associated with the digest. After image GC, can do that. On startup, we can delete digest entries which have no corresponding node on the image on the node. So if we crash in the middle of image garbage collection, like we told the runtime, delete this image, and then we didn't quite get to cleaning up the digest entries, we crash and restart. We're like, oh, I've got digest entries for these 100,000 images. How expensive is it to get a list? I mean, it must not be that expensive because we're listing the images on the node to know things like garbage collection. So in the garbage collection,
we do that constantly. It happens like every couple minutes or something like that.
On startup or in the background in the GC routine. clean up digest entries which have no corresponding image on the node. Okay. This is more of a question for the intent to pull. So I'm going to put it.
Did you only want to do that for an actual garbage collection, or were you thinking about every couple of minutes flushing what's no longer on the node? If you're gonna
I don't
one at a time per image garbage collect, or just flush?
I don't know.
Yeah.
So like GC digest entries along with kubelet image GC as we delete visual images, maybe on startup for entries which have no corresponding image.
I like that on startup.
Maybe periodically. I don't know enough to know.
Unless there's disk pressure, you're going to do it once on startup. So that was a good intuition there.
Like on startup seems plausible to me. I
think we'll need to. There's also a scenario that I'm thinking of where two different images the same image was pulled with two different registry credentials and maps to the same underlying image. The kubelet issues a GC for one of them, but doesn't necessarily issue a GC for the other. I don't remember how it bookkeeps for the other one. I don't remember because it will then get an image status back and say like that image is no longer in use. I'm not thinking about it, but will it issue a GC explicitly to the point where we could keep that track? So I think it will be safest to also on startup have kubelet just go through what exists there and make sure that everything is in line with its cache.
Okay. So that's an open question. Like, do we know in the kubelet image GC, do we know if we've actually deleted everything referencing this digest, or if we're just, I mean, if the point of GC is to free up disk space, it seems like it's important to know.
But the thing is,
deleting a tag from an image doesn't really help us with disk space. I don't know.
No, that's a good point. I like the point that I'm thinking about is like if they're both mapped to the same image but they have different registry credentials, I just wonder if the kubelet's only focus is cleaning up disk space in that moment. Is it going to also be mapping the two different images to the same underlying image and then make sure that it deletes its entries for both or calls GC for both? Like I just don't know.
So when we do the deletion, does GC have visibility to the digest? So when we do the deletion, as long as we have visibility to the digest, I'm expecting all of these entries to be stored under the digest, like in a file for the digest or a directory for the digest, or however we structure it. So when we say like clean up this image, we should be able to say forget all the credential anonymous pull info for this digest. Okay.
So two ways to look at that. One, it doesn't really matter that it's still there. And the reason you're doing a garbage collection normally outside of reboot is you're trying to reduce disk pressure. And if you're pulling them out one at a time, you're locking a record on a file system that's under disk pressure.
Because we've sort of dropped the TTL aspect of this, I really want to make sure that we're only keeping track of things for which we actually have images on the node.
I got it. Because you're worried about a kubelet staying up for a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then
pull GC, pull GC, pull
yeah,
GC, and
a
it's
whole
like,
bunch of
wait,
little
my disk is
artifacts. A
full
whole
of
bunch of little artifacts.
stupid bookkeeping. Like, I don't care that you pulled 10,000 images anonymously or 1,000,000 images anonymously. Why are you breaking my disk with that?
Well, I was just saying there's two parts, right? One is every couple of minutes we check status on all the images, right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Irregardless of disk pressure. I'm just saying there's startup, and then there's the status update, and then there's right the disk pressure event. And that's the one that I'm just questioning. I'm just asking, you sure you want to actually garbage collect these records during disk pressure? That's all.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
If it was already cleared up every couple of minutes anyway, when we're doing status or on boot, then maybe it's okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to hook into an existing thing that's happening every couple minutes, and
yeah, then you're solving the same problem. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Is that the full life cycle? Like before pull, after pull, based on failure or success, and then GC of the cache. I think those are all the times that we would write to or promote or clean up these entries. I think that's the full life cycle.
One thing that we did something not super similar, but sort of that there's some parallels between this and some work we did in Cryo for manually cleaning up images in containers. And something that we found useful is keeping track of whether Cryo crashed, because then we know whether or not to do this sort of more in-depth check to make sure that everything is in the right state.
Mm-hmm.
We could potentially investigate such a thing where, you know, if the kubelet shut down gracefully, that means we know that there were no images pulled, you know, in progress of being pulled. And that may, you know, optimize the cleanup case potentially. So something to think about. I don't necessarily think we need to do that, but that's one thing that I thought of.
You're saying identifying whether we're doing a kubelet restart versus container reconnect, container runtime reconnect.
No, specifically, like, you know, in the case, like whether it's a kubelet crash or the kubelet gracefully exited, because the state of where we were pulling those images would be different.
I got you. Okay. I was taking too much in on the container runtime side, whether it was a crash or yeah.
Oh yeah, for Cryo, it was like we wanted to make sure that the image storage was not corrupted.
Yeah. We're about out of time. I think I really like this sort of life cycle. I think I can understand like the steps and what we do on each sort of, it's the state diagram, which is great. Maybe a good thing to talk through next time would be like the structure of these intent to pull and digest entries. Like, is it a directory? Is it a single file? I mean, we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of like, all right, how are we actually going to do this? And we can talk through like the pros and cons of like how those structures, like what we need to do, which ones are going to be written frequently, how big are they going to be, what does cleanup look like, can we do atomic, atomic replace or move with files or directories, or we can talk through some of that stuff. I think we addressed that up there. Okay. Did you want to introduce this topic? Standa?
Oh yeah, this was an interesting side effect of what we agreed on last time, and that was we are thinking about introducing like policies for the credential verifications, like always never verify, and I think that that kind of introduces the problem of people maybe wanting to switch between these policies.
Like in the split config?
Yeah, in the kubelet config. Yeah, I was wondering how we would be handling that.
I don't think it's an issue. I mean, all the things the kubelet has pulled, it should be persisting bookkeeping for. So, like the bucket of pre-existing images, shouldn't get polluted with stuff the kubelet pulled. So if they
probably
the policy,
not. I guess now that we are tracking also the images that are pulled with anonymous, this may not be an issue.
Yeah, and that's one reason I think we should track which images were pulled anonymously, so that we can distinguish between ones that the kubelet has no understanding of and ones that it says, oh no, I pulled this without credentials or without pod credentials. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought of one more category. So we previously in the few seconds we have left, pulled without any credentials. So these two will both appear as anonymous from the perspective of the kubelet. Kubelet didn't give credentials, or the kubelet didn't give credentials, and the runtime injected some credentials. Both of those the kubelet will treat as anonymous. So maybe we could refine this to, instead of anonymous, it's like no kubelet provided credentials or whatever.
This is a reminder to Peter and I that it's there is a difference, and we need to record that no creds were passed in over the CRY API on a pull. Not whether or not we used creds.
There's this category, which is a node-wide credential plugin. Did provide credentials, but they weren't specific to the pod. So the kubelet doesn't actually care about revalidating a particular pod's access. It could be useful to record that distinction, even if for re-verification purposes, anonymous and node-wide credentials are treated the same way.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And on the container runtime side, we don't know the difference.
So we would record the dimensions and the hashes. I don't think that practically changes anything. Both the anonymous and the node-wide credential case would not need to re-verify. So if a poll succeeded with either of those,
just to verify, I always call those keyring injected creds. Is that the same thing as what you're thinking about?
There are different keyring implementations. So
okay.
Not exactly. Like a keyring that is based on image pull secrets from the pod does require re-verification. A keyring that contains a credential that came from a node-wide plugin would not require re-verification.
I see.
So they both kind of go through the same interface.
Gotcha.
Yep. The pod pull used pod bubble credentials. Okay.
And really, the reason for asking that, I didn't know if there was something else underway. In the code I wrote, I only knew it was a keyring. I didn't know who was using these keyrings or injecting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. This was great. I will share the recording out, and we can pick it up there next time. Thank you.
Awesome.
Really great meeting. Thank you all.